Oh, hey, welcome to the Bee Barn Build Series. I'm Jim, and I'm going to be your host for at least 4 videos. This is part 1, which is the main hive body. Today, we're going to talk about the base inner hive, the foam wrapping that goes around that hive, the entrance, the bottom board, and the wooden dressing that goes on out here in the front. Future videos are going to cover the hive stands that these things sit on, the observation, insulation, and feeder box that goes up here, the outer winter wraps that go over the top, and the frames that go inside the box. Now, I hope you watched the previous intro reveal video where I go over the main concepts of what a bee barn is. And what we're talking about here is a deep, highly insulated, fully wrapped brood box with no air infiltration from the bottom, one lower entrance, no upper entrances, no upper vents, and a nice heavy lid that goes over the top. The reason for all that is we're trying to create a thermally stable, thermally isolated brood cavity for the bees. I'm trying to keep all the outside weather influences off of that brood cavity, and that's why I'm doing all this stuff. In version 1.0 of my hives, I started with a wooden hive box on the inside, wrapped that with foam, and then wrapped the foam with more wood. And I did achieve great results with that, but the design was very heavy and a little bit complicated. Version 2, I wanted to clean things up, make this a little easier to build, so I started with a polystyrene hive on the inside and then wrapped the polystyrene hive with foam. And I think this is a much lighter, simpler, easier design. If all you have is a wooden hive, you can do this with a wooden hive or any other kind of polystyrene hive you have. You may not have the same materials I do, but if you follow along, you're going to see how I did things and use your creativity, and you can achieve the same results as I did with the materials that you have. And before all the comments start rolling in that, oh, this guy just wrapped a beehive with foam and he thinks he's some kind of beekeeping genius, no, that's not what I think, and I did a little more than that. But basically, yes, I took a hive, I wrapped it in foam, and I've achieved great results with this design. It's very basic, it's very simple. I'm not claiming to be a genius, but this stuff works. I made a video about it, it got a lot of views, and for the last 2 years, literally daily, I receive emails, messages, and comments that people ask me, how did you build your hive? Tell me how you do it. I want to buy plans. I want to buy your hive. Make one for me. This video series is the answer to all of those questions. So please follow along. I'm trying to answer everything everyone's ever asked me about how I built my hives. All I'm trying to do here is help people who want to give their bees a better home than a cheap wooden box. So this is how I did it. If you have questions, I'm down in the comments. If you're polite and you ask nice questions, I will answer nicely. So enjoy the videos and thank you for tuning in. Before I get into the main build, I just want to go over why I chose polystyrene and why I went with this particular hive. You're about to see a logo on the other side of these boxes, and I just want you to know that this is not a sponsored ad. I wasn't sent these boxes. I paid for these all with my own money, and this company has no idea that I'm making this video. Now, all that being said, the reason I went with these boxes is because I think they're the best. This is where I wanted to spend my money. I tried several different brands. I tried different models, even of this brand, and I didn't like other models they had. I really liked this particular one. The polystyrene of this brand is really hard. It's very solid. It's not going to absorb any moisture. The reason I went with polystyrene in the first place is because my old bee barns absorbed a ton of moisture in the wintertime, and all the things inside get kind of warped. And it was hard to get frames out in the springtime, and it eventually dried out, but I didn't want to deal with that again. So I wanted something that didn't absorb moisture. So I started searching, and I found these. Now, the great thing I like about these particular ones is the joinery is fantastic. So all the things fit together very nicely, and when you screw them together, they just lock really tight. It's very nice. There's also a nice lip on the edge of these hives. This is the big reason I like these, is these hive bodies nest together. It's almost like a half lap joint. You can kind of see it there. And when you put another body on top, they overlap. so it keeps wind and water from going into the hive. The 10 frame version of this hive doesn't have that feature. They're just flat on top, and I just hated that because they just kind of slid around on top of each other. These have the overlapping nesting feature, so very nice. So the company is Lyson, and the model is the 8-9 frame hive. It's called the Lyson 8-9. That's what these are. So one thing I've learned after building on these hives is that wood glue works on polystyrene. I never knew that was a thing. So anyway, what I've been doing is taking a little bit of glue, just a little bit. Not a thick bead, just kind of drag it over because you don't want a lot of squeeze out here. And this will just make everything even more rigid than it is. So these things just slide together. The fit is perfect every time. Because these are manufactured, in a mold, they're going to be perfect. It's just so much better than wood. There's no variability at all. Everything just fits. So do not crank these down too much. They just have to be snug. So these hives come with optional vent inserts here that you can put inside, but they do come with the polystyrene closures here. And I just put a little bit of glue, put it in the hole, and that's it. The other great thing about these hives that I love is the edges are all trimmed with this plastic material. That's where you're going to hit this with a hive tool or where you're going to set it on the ground. And that polystyrene is never going to degrade or get chipped off on the edges where there's lots of wear. So just a really overall great design. So I'll explain how to prepare your wooden hive for foam, and then I'll get into the polystyrene. This is the basic layout I started with B-Barn 1.0, a deep, a medium, and a bottom board. This all holds the extra long frames, which is the basis of the entire design. So these frames hang in like this, right to the bottom of the hive here. Now I know I want to wrap this whole thing with 2-inch styrofoam, but I couldn't figure out how to make the foam flow into the entrance, and I didn't know how I wanted that to work. So what I did is lined up the back of the hive with the bottom board, made sure this was flush here, and then came to the front, and I knew I wanted 2 inches of foam on the front. So what you need to do is take your bottom board and mark off where that line is, right there, and cut off anything that's sticking forward of that. So make this nice and straight down, 2 inches thick, and then flush at the bottom. Now to solve the problem of the bees touching the foam or interacting with that foam for the entrance, you just need to cut a piece of wood that's 2 inches deep and as wide as your bottom board. So that goes just like that. You don't even have to attach it. It just sits right there because that's where your foam is going to sit on the front of the hive once you cut your foam. So that's what you're going for, is a nice flat front. So once you have your bottom board cut back and you have this little doohickey on the front of your hives and everything is nice and square and flush, then we're going to get into measuring for the foam. But let me explain that on the polystyrene hive. Now, the Lyson bottom board is a pretty awesome piece of engineering. It's got that plastic ridge that I was talking about so that the boxes nest right onto the bottom board. It's got a great screen. It's got a great pull-out tray for mite inspections, but the shape of it was wrong for the B-Barn. So I modified it a bit. I went over to the table saw and I didn't like the feet that were on the bottom, so I sent this through the saw and I cut those off. And I didn't like the front that was sticking out on the front of the hive. So now that this is cut down to size, my hive parts fit nice and flush. I want this to be flush in the front and flush in the back. And they're joined. This goes on here. So similar to the wooden B-Barn, I wanted this to be nice and flush down to here, but then kick out. But on this one, I don't want that kick out because I'm going to do something a little different to the Lyson hive. So I want this to be nice and flush for Bee Barn 2.0. Bee Barn 1.0 looks like this. We could also do this, what I'm going to do here with this hive, but that's up to you. You can do what you like. All right, now it's time to measure for foam. I prefer to put a wide piece on the front of the hive that overlaps the sides, and then have the sides go back and extend beyond the back, and then the back piece of foam is exactly the width of the back. So you want to measure the front and add 4 inches to the front measurement. So it's actually going to be 20 1/8 by 19. And then this one, you're going to measure the length of your hive, which is 21.5 on this example, but I'm going to add 2 inches to the side measurements to go beyond the back. Then your back piece is going to be the exact width of the hive, 16 1/8 wide. So measure your fronts, your 2 sides, and your back. You also want to measure the underside of the hive, or the overall footprint of the hive. So on this hive, the overall footprint is going to be 21.5 by 16 1/8. And I'm going to cut a piece of foam to go underneath the bottom board. On this one, your foam is going to be a little bit longer. It's going to be 22 by 13 3/4. But just measure your hive and then go and cut the foam.
I forgot to mention this in the video, but don't forget to add 2 inches to the overall height measurements of your side, front, and back panels. The hives are going to be sitting on 2 inches of foam insulation, and all of those panels are going to be covering that lower insulation. So don't forget to add those 2 inches to your measurements.
So let's go cut the foam. All right, so for each hive, you're going to need about 1 sheet of 4x8 foam to complete a hive plus the lid that you're going to build in the future video here. But for this section, we need a 2 foot wide by 8 foot long piece of foam for the hive body to do the 4 sides and the bottom. So I got this piece of foam at Home Depot, and this now costs about $47 US. This used to cost about 20 bucks, but you know, the way things are today, 47 bucks. But again, I need half of it for this part of the project. If you get the pink stuff, it comes pre-scored. So all you have to do is go like this and snap it, and you got a perfect 2 foot by 8 foot sheet. And then you can lay out your markings for your cuts. So these are the measurements I'm going for on this piece of foam. This is for a Lyson 8-9 box. Yours might be a little different than this, but this is what I am going for. And I figured out that I can get all these pieces out of this sheet of foam. So this is a little bit more than arts and crafts, but it's not rocket science. You're basically, you know, measuring and cutting. All right, I'm gonna cut this foam on the table saw because I'm comfortable with the table saw, but I wanna show you that you can cut this with a knife and a T-square. This is a drywall square. So you wanna get your foam overhanging so that, you know, you have space to cut into. And you're gonna wanna get one of these. This is the Stanley Fat Max Extreme. This is the tool to use for this project. It's a very large blade. It's got the snap-off blades, but I extend that all the way out, and it's got a little wheel to close it. Tighten that up so that your blade doesn't want to pull out. But basically, take your measurement right there. Line it up, and you're going to want to take multiple passes. This won't cut through on one slice. It's not fast, but it is accurate. So you can still get a nice square edge if you take your time. But I'm going to show you how to do this on a table saw.
I can't express how important it is to not cut foam on a table saw unless you are very experienced with a table saw. I've been using a table saw for almost 20 years, and I've been cutting foam on the saw for about 7 years. Foam is very different than wood. It's much lighter, and it's also much stickier. As soon as it touches the blade, it's going to want to lift up, So you got to have a lot of downward pressure on the panel, but it also tends to bind very easily, especially when you're cutting up against a fence. Kickback is not going to hurt as much if you do get kickback, but that binding is very dangerous. So plant your feet comfortably, know what you're doing, definitely wear a face shield, and once you start to push through the blade, you got to keep going, because if you stop, you're going to bind.
All right, if you're using a wooden hive, the first thing you're going to do is put the bottom insulation underneath the bottom board. This insulation should be exactly the same footprint as the hive, so it's going to be flush all the way around. Now in B-Barn 1.0, any moisture in the hive would drip down the inside of the hive and land on the bottom board, and the bottom board got very soaking wet. In version 1.0, everything got kind of expanded and, you know, warped down here, and I didn't have insulation under the hive in the first version. I had insulation in the stand below everything, but this still kind of got soaked because the water just went into the wood. It was not a good system. But if you want to do this, I recommend having a way for the water to get out when it gets down past the bottom board. So that's what I did in version 2.0. Now the Lyson board is very well engineered. It's obviously not wood, so it's not going to absorb moisture, it's not going to swell or warp or anything. And any water that does drip down on the inside of the hive is going to hit here, and all these angles in the bottom board point to this mesh. The mesh leads to a mite tray underneath. Now I am going to drill holes in the mite tray, at the back of the mite tray, so any water that comes down in the hive lands into the mite tray, it will drip backwards into the holes, and then it will drip down onto this piece of foam. And I scooped out the foam and made a bowl there.
To do this, I used one of these little dog grooming tools, and it's very easy to just scrape the foam and shape it to whatever shape you like. Each panel took me about 5 minutes to do. If you're going to do this, please don't do it outdoors if you care at all about the environment, and if you are inside, you're going to want to be next to some kind of dust collector or a running shop vac while you're scraping, because these little bits get everywhere, and you're going to be a lot happier if you have some kind of suction going while you're scraping.
So this sits on this. So water will come down, it will go through the mesh into the mite collection tray and then drip out into the foam and then right out of the back of the hive. Now before we wrap everything with foam, I want to tie the bottom board to the two brood boxes. So these do nest together nicely. The Lyson has this, you know, this joint I talked about, and that's a good fit. It feels good, but it's not completely tied. So what I'm going to do is connect these with caulk. And this isn't just painter's caulk, this is like a sealant. So you want to use something of high quality, not the cheapest caulk you can find. But all I do is put a bead around that lip. You don't want to put a ton, it's kind of like wood glue, you don't want it squeezing out everywhere, but you do want it to mesh up. So make sure there's enough there so that it will touch both sides. So that goes on there. And another level here. And the top box. And they just lock right in. So that is the Lyson hive. We have the boxes now are tied together and they're both tied to the bottom board. I want to flush everything up so that's a nice flat area there and flat on the sides. You don't have to tie the bottom board to the foam because I'm going to do that in the next step. I would not recommend caulking this because that's just going to get messy. But what you can do is tie that together using zip tape. This is flexible tape. We're going to be using it on the other hives, but this is a nice system for tying these together. You can just span the gap there and stick this all the way around the hive, and that will be a nice connection. It will seal out water, wind, air, everything, and make this so that your boxes aren't sliding around. So I would definitely zip tape this together. You could even zip tape your bottom board to the lower box. You don't need to tape that together, but definitely seal these gaps with tape. All right, now it's finally time to start wrapping these hives with foam. If you have a wooden hive, you're going to take the piece of foam that you cut for your face, and you're going to cut out the area for the tunnel, for the entrance here, and that's going to slide right over there, and that's how it should look. So you have your nice clean face here, and remember, you need to leave the 2-inch overhang on the sides, because that is where your side foam is going to go right there. So you're going to have this joint here, and your front face is going to be nice and flat. And that leaves that tunnel opening for the bees. There will be more stuff on the front of the hive later, but right now this is this step. Now on the polystyrene hive, it's a little different because I left this flat, and I think I have a better solution for this front. What I did is take a piece of foam that lines up here, a little bit below the entrance, and then I made a tunnel sandwich. This thing right here. All this is just a piece of wood that lines up with the entrance so the bees can walk right in here. Then 2 spacers, these are 2 inches deep for the foam, and I left an 8-inch opening in the center right here. Then just 1 more piece of wood right on top. And that makes a tunnel just like this tunnel here. Then I took a piece of foam and finished it off right on top. So this is the same functionality as Bee Barn 1.0. Still got your tunnels here. You still got all your foam around here. But I think this is a much cleaner, elegant solution. So I'm going to go now and show you how I attach all this stuff, and then we're going to go right around the whole hive.
Before you attach anything to the hives, I recommend putting a 20-degree bevel at the top of each panel. This way, water won't get into the hive or accumulate at the top rim there if it rains on your hives. Also, when I make the covers in part 3 of this series, they are going to mesh up with that angle at the top of the hives.
Now for this process, I'm going to use wood glue, zip tape, 2 kinds of caulk, blue painter's tape, and spray foam. Sounds kind of crazy, but it's going to be worth it. All right, the first step in attaching all the foam to the sides of the Lyson hive is to attach this piece of foam using zip tape. I'm going to put a piece of tape underneath the hive. This is zip tape here. I'm going to measure exactly the right width. And then I have a little knife here, which I very carefully use to slice the tape off. And then I put the tape halfway underneath the hive. Leave half the tape exposed on the front and just press that up. Okay. And then this piece just gets pressed down, but you want to be careful not to press it in the wrong spot. So I'm going to use the side pieces as a gauge so I know exactly where to put that piece. So these are 2 inches on either side. I'm going to use that to align this piece here, just like that. Once this hits the zip tape, it sticks really firmly. So make sure you're lined up and then just press down on the zip tape. Okay. Now remember, wood glue will stick foam. So I'm going to put the glue right on the foam. It does not have to be pretty. This is a beehive. Some glue in there. And just press it right on. Okay. So that is sticking now. Next step is our tunnel sandwich. Glue sticks wood to foam. Regular yellow wood glue, nothing special here. First piece of wood. And you want to make that, again, this is cut to line up with the entrance right here. Just press that down. If you give these a good squeeze, they kind of vacuum together, and then you don't have to clamp them. They get clamped with all the tape and stuff I'm going to add in a second, but you just want to get them seated by just kind of squeezing them together. Wood glue sets up pretty quickly. You got, about 5-10 minutes to kind of move it around, but then it really starts to set up fast. So get that all on there. And there. So before I put on the side panels, there is one weakness to these hives that I don't like. I wish these were just solid polystyrene all the way through, but when they make these things in the mold, they mold out a handle here, and this reduces the thickness of the hive right here to like 1/2 inch. It's very thin right in this area, and I don't like that. So I'm going to solve that with some blue tape. Bear with me. This will make sense in just a moment. I'm going to put a piece of tape around right at that handle area. This isn't structural. You'll see what I mean in a moment. None of this would be necessary if Lyson would just make a 4-inch thick hive. I wish they just had a 4-inch thick hive with no upper entrance, no venting, no cutouts for handles. I wouldn't have to do any of this. I just buy their hives. All right, on to the side. Okay, I'm going to do the same move on the side that I did on the front with a piece of zip tape underneath here, this width of the entire side. Okay, now the side has some vulnerabilities here underneath this area too. I'm going to fill those with caulk. This is just the cheap painter's caulk. This is just supposed to fill up the gap. So I'm going to caulk right in here. Leave a little squeeze out. That's all going to get stuck to the side foam. So fill in any holes you have. If you're doing a wooden hive, you can do the same thing. This is the last chance you're going to have to fill holes, tape seams. I'm going to put a little here as well. And just make sure that'll press in when the foam goes into there. Now, for these holes here, I'm using spray foam. This is just gap and crack foam. The tape just holds the foam in place while you're putting the side panel on. So fill up that hole. And now this stuff's going to expand quite a bit, but it's going to sort of press down into this opening as well. So it's not going to press the side of the foam out. Because I'm not trying to fill the whole side, I'm just trying to fill this handle area. And then that will make its way down. As it squeezes in, it'll squeeze down and fill up here. That's where the expansion will go. All right, so now we get your zip tape at the bottom, caulk down here, foam here, and we're going to take a panel. I'm line it up. Don't press onto the tape until you're sure you're lined up. Get everything square, and then just push down onto the tape. Once it hits the tape, it's not coming unstuck. So get it down there. All right. Now I'm going to put a little piece of tape here to square this up. I want this piece flush with the front. Okay, moving on to the back. I cut the back piece of foam to fit just right. And then I marked off where the mite board is in the back, and I put this through the table saw and I sliced this off. So that leaves this here as a little door to get in to change, check the mite board and to let water to drip out there. So this piece here is going to go here. So first measure your piece and then just slice one slice through here. But when I fix this, I'm going to do it nice and tight with that in place, but you don't want to foam or tape this piece because that has to come out. So the back is going to be just like the side, not the bottom though, but we are going to foam the handles. Because the other thing that sticks foam to foam really well is foam. So a little bit of foam here. Just a teeny bit. In that corner. And then this just presses in. And I want to make it snug down here. And then tape that together. I'm going to first put the tape on the outer edge. Line that up. And stick it to the side piece first. And then stretch it over. Just make sure you don't tape or foam in here. Okay, same move. Zip tape underneath, but not on this. Just make sure you're about halfway, all the way down the side. And I like to try and catch the front here. Caulk under there. A little bit here, I forgot. Just closing every gap I can see. All right. Press in first, then down. Okay, and then the front. I want to tie this together. This just holds everything a little tighter. Keeps everything lined up. So I want to put some caulk on the front here, and I'm going to use the good stuff. This is more of a weather seal. so water doesn't drip down backwards into the hive right at the entrance there. Little glue on the wood, stick the foam. Spray foam. And the last piece. Start on the edge. I just use a blade. Cut the tape, and then if you use your blade at the same angle that you angled the tops, just pull it forward. And it finishes that off. And then the last step is just to caulk this edge here to keep water from going backwards behind the foam. You want to use the good stuff. This is the good flexible exterior stuff. Just make sure this is all covered. Try not to get it up on that ridge though. This isn't fine furniture, so this is going to be a little bit messy, but it will be very functional. All right, it doesn't look pretty now, but it will after a coat of paint. The goal is to keep water out and air in, not to be beautiful. So this is kind of a stopping point right now. If you wanted to leave it like this, the bees would be perfectly happy in here. They'd fly right in and out of this little tunnel. They'd go in and be totally fine. However, I'm going to dress mine up with some wood on the front and a little awning for them. And that's going to be coming up in the next step. If you do want to leave it like this and just put them out like this, they'd be fine, but you definitely have to coat this with a coat of latex paint. You don't want to leave polystyrene out in the sun because after like 2 years, it just starts to dissolve. So coat this with latex paint. It's going to last a long, long time. All right, so this little added decoration in the front is a tribute to Bee Barn 1.0, but it's also functional. I tend to see bees hanging out in the front of the hive at the entrance. They never hang out up here. They never hang out on the sides of the hives. They're always right at the entrance around this area. So I wanted to give them some wood to cling on to. They don't care that this is foam because they're never really on it. So what I did is just cut up some wood, and this is how I'm going to finish the front of my hives. This was just a 2x6. This is the Alaskan yellow cedar. I actually stole this from a dismantled bee barn, and I milled it back down and then sliced it on the table saw for 2 pieces and cut that out. You can cut that out with a jigsaw. I used the bandsaw because I have one now, but that's basically just cut that to make that line up with the front. And then another board there to kind of give them that target area to fly into. Bees do not need a landing board. My hives have not had a landing board for 2 years now, and there's no ill effects. The bees are just fine landing on a wall and then climbing into the hive. I do, however, give them awnings. So this is an awning that I'm going to glue here, and that goes on the hive like that. And that is for rain shed here, also for shade, because the bees, like I said, hang out all around the entrance. So I wanted to give them a little protected zone to do that. I'm also going to put on this little piece here. This is not for landing purposes, but that is where the mouse guard is going to sit. The mouse guard needs a little lip to catch on because it kind of screws straight to the front here, but it needs to kind of have a little footing. So that's going to go there, and that's all that is. So some simple hive parts. That is a 5-degree angle. There's a 5-degree angle on the top here so that any water that comes down here can roll right off. But let's glue this on the front with wood glue. Before I put this onto the hive, I'm going to affix the awning to this piece of wood with some screws through the back. Get that pretty much centered. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's the bee awning. I'm gonna just kind of hold that with my hand and get that flushed up there. Permanently attached. And this just goes on with glue. Just kind of squeeze that in, and it suctions to the face of the foam. Not sure why this works so well, but I guess the foam is porous and the wood just suctions to it. There's no like lapping or joinery here, but maybe it'll just stick together a little better. And this is my little mouse guard rest. A little glue. All right, just leave that overnight. And cut to the final product. So after all the glue dries, the caulk dries, you definitely want to put a couple of coats of paint on your polystyrene. You can't put polystyrene out in the sun. After like a year or two, it's going to start to turn to powder. I like to go to the home center. You get the Oops paint in the paint aisle, the Mistake paint. They have random cool colors. You never know what you're going to get. But latex paint rolled on or brushed onto polystyrene will make it last a lot longer out in the elements. Do not use aerosol spray paint on polystyrene. Your hive will turn to Swiss cheese. That aerosol will ruin the polystyrene. So use latex paint, roll it on, take your time, and these hives are going to last a long time with the paint. Now I know all this work and all this time and material investment seems like a lot up front, but believe me, once you make these things and you put the bees in the boxes, so many things become easier with these hives. For example, after I put my bees in these hives 2 years ago, I have not lifted a brood box for an inspection or for any reason in 2 years. No lifting of brood boxes anymore. Inspections become a lot easier. The deep frames are great for the queens. The insulation makes everything stable inside here so the bees can brood up earlier in the springtime. They don't go through hardly as many resources as they used to go through in a regular wooden box because the insulation keeps their heat in the box, so they don't need to burn as much honey to generate heat in the wintertime. There's just so many things about these hives that make beekeeping easier. So put the time in up front, don't cheap out and just do a hack job. Take your time, make it nice, the bees will thank you, and your life will be a lot easier. The next video in the series is going to be how I make my stands. These things are burly, they're rock solid, and after I put my bee barns onto stands, that also changed how I keep my bees. And I'm going to explain all that in the next video. That's part 2, coming out in about a week. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Subscribe, and there is lots more coming up. Thanks for watching.